All right, bubble up, everyone, because today we're taking a deep dive into a theory that really flips the script on how we think about truth.
Yeah, this one's a real head scratcher.
We're talking about the identity theory of truth.
We are.
And lucky for us, we've got some excerpts from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy to guide us.
Great source.
So to kick things off, what is this identity theory all about? Give us the rundown.
Well, it's not just about, labeling sentences true or false. It's about, what's the meaning behind those sentences?
Okay, so it's getting at something deeper than just whether a statement matches up with a fact.
Exactly. The identity theory says the meaning of a true statement isn't just, pointing at a fact. It's actually identical to that fact.
Whoa, okay, hold on. Let me wrap my brain around that for a second.
Sure.
Instead of saying, the sky is blue, and that sentence matching up with some separate fact about the sky being blue, the identity theory is saying that the very idea of the sky being blue is somehow a part of reality itself.
That's the gist of it, yeah.
Okay, so we're talking about a theory that's trying to bridge the gap between our thoughts and the actual world.
Exactly.
Before we get too far in the weeds here, can we back up a bit and compare this to the correspondence theory of truth?
Yeah, good idea. The correspondence theory is kind of the more traditional view. It says a thought or a sentence is true if it corresponds to a fact. Like, if I say, this microphone is on, that statement is true if, well, the mic is actually on, right?
Right, so it's like matching a picture to the scene it depicts. But the identity theory comes in and says, wait, isn't that just saying the same thing twice?
That's exactly what it's getting at. It's saying, where's the real explanation there?
Yeah, where's the beef?
And it tries to answer that by saying that a true statement's meaning isn't just this thing that happens to correspond to a fact. It actually is the fact.
So instead of a picture in a scene, it's like saying the picture is the scene.
Yeah, I like that. And to dive even deeper, identity theory uses this concept of thinkables.
Thinkables. All right, I'm intrigued. Break that down for us.
It's a fancy way of talking about the stuff in our thoughts that can be true or false.
Gotcha.
Like, the earth is round, that's a thinkable.
Okay, so anything I could think that could be true or false is a thinkable.
Exactly.
Right.
And the identity theory gets really interesting because it says these thinkables, the stuff we can think about, can also be the case, like out there in the world.
So if I have a thought, a thinkable, that happens to be true, it's not just some random thing in my head.
Right.
It's actually a piece of reality.
That's the core idea. Now, this does raise some question. For example, some philosophers say, if this is true, then all facts must be thinkable.
Hold on a minute, though. What about things humans can't even comprehend yet? Like some complex scientific phenomenon we haven't discovered or even thought about yet.
You've hit on one of the big challenges to this theory.
Uh-huh.
Does that mean those aren't facts until we think them? That's a great question to ponder.
Yeah, big questions there.
But before we disappear down that rabbit hole,
Right.
let's look at another key part of identity theory, the different levels of meaning.
Okay.
We have to separate the sense of a word or thought from its reference in the world.
Sense and reference. I remember this from philosophy class.
Right?
Classic example, the evening star versus the morning star.
Perfect example. Different senses, but they both refer to the same thing, the planet Venus.
Exactly.
And this difference becomes really important when we're trying to figure out what identity theory is actually saying about truth.
So how do these different levels of meaning affect the identity theory? Like, does it matter if we're talking about the sense of a statement versus its reference?
Absolutely. This is where we bring in two of philosophy's heavy hitters, Gottlob Frege and Bertrand Russell.
Oh, the big guns are coming out now.
Here we go.
All right, so how do Frege and Russell weigh in on this whole sense and reference business?
Well, Frege was all about the sense. He thought that true thoughts, at the level of how we grasp their meaning, are identical to facts.
So for Frege, the thought itself, the way we understand it, that's what actually is the fact.
That's Frege in a nutshell.
Okay, got it. What about Russell?
Now, Russell comes along and says, hold on, I think we need to focus on the reference the actual thing a word or thought points to. He thought it's propositions at that level of reference that are true or false. And true propositions, according to Russell, are facts.
So we've got two different takes on identity theory here, depending on which level of meaning we're emphasizing.
You got it.
Okay, so that's Frege and Russell.
And it gets even more complex because some philosophers say, hey, why not combine both ideas?
Interesting.
Maybe there's a hybrid view.
So are we saying that both thoughts and propositions can be true by being identical to facts, but maybe they're identical to different kinds of facts?
That is a great question, and it leads us to some of the really challenging but super interesting parts of this whole theory. But before we get into all that, we need to talk about some of the challenges this theory faces. It's not all sunshine and roses.
Yeah, every theory's got to have its weak shots, right? What kind of problems are we talking about here?
Well, one of the biggest is what's called the modal problem.
Okay, the modal problem sounds intimidating. Break it down for me.
Okay, so the identity theory says a true proposition is a fact. What about all those possibilities, all the things that could have been true?
Right.
Like, if Socrates is wise is a fact,
Hmm.
Does that fact still exist in some possible world where Socrates, maybe didn't make the best choices and ended up, well, not so wise?
I see what you're saying. It's like, how can something be a fact if it could be different in another scenario? If it's supposed to be this solid, unchanging thing?
Exactly. That's the crux of the modal problem. And it's a real head-scratcher for identity theory, but some philosophers have come up with ways to address this. Richard Cartwright, for instance, says the fact still exists, it's just not factual in those other possible worlds.
Okay, help me visualize this. It's like saying
Hmm.
the fact that we're recording this deep dive is a fact in this world, right? But in some other world, maybe we decided to go get tacos instead. That fact still exists in some way. It's just not factual there.
You got it. It's a subtle distinction, but it's key to Cartwright's solution. The fact itself doesn't vanish, it just kind of loses its factualness in some possible worlds. To put it differently, imagine a world where Socrates is super cheerful and easygoing.
Okay, yeah.
In that world, the fact Socrates is wise, it might still be there in a way, but it's not factual because, well, he's not really embodying that characteristic there.
That's a really neat way of thinking about it. I kind of get it now.
Good, good.
But even if we buy that solution, how do we even know which fact goes with which proposition in the first place? Like, couldn't any proposition, even a false one, be identical to some random fact out there in the universe?
That's another tricky one, the right fact problem, and it gets to the heart of what the identity theory is all about. Some philosophers say that the right fact is, well, the fact that actually makes the proposition true.
So if I say the moon is made of cheese, which obviously isn't true, there's no corresponding fact because the proposition's just wrong. It's not pointing to any real thing.
Precisely. If a proposition is false, there simply is no fact that it's identical to. The identity theory doesn't try to say false propositions are true somewhere else. It's like, nope, they're just false because they don't line up with any facts.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about that, what was it, the slingshot argument? I vaguely remember that one from my philosophy days. Didn't that try to show that all true sentences ultimately point to the same thing? Like some kind of mega fact, a great fact?
Yeah, the slingshot argument, that one's a real doozy. And if it was true, I'd blow the whole identity theory out of the water because there wouldn't be all these different separate facts. But luckily, there's a bit of a loophole in the slingshot's logic.
Oh, good.
It assumes that any two statements that are logically equivalent, so they have the same truth value,
Okay.
they must refer to the same thing. But that's not always the case.
Really? Can you give me an example to illustrate that?
Let's say it's raining.
Okay, simple enough.
Now, that's logically the same as saying it's raining, and either unicorns exist or they don't.
That's getting a bit more complicated.
But they're both true if it's raining.
Yeah.
But they don't seem to be referring to the same thing. One is just about the weather.
Right.
And the other one brings in unicorns, which has nothing to do with whether or not it's actually raining.
I see your point. It's like adding a bunch of extra stuff that doesn't change the basic fact of whether or not it's raining.
Exactly. So that's why the slingshot argument may not be as powerful as it first seems. It makes this big assumption about reference that doesn't always hold up when we look at how language actually works.
Gotcha. So we dodged that bullet. But is there anything else the identity theory has to contend with?
Oh, there is. There's this thing called the congruence problem. It points out that we use different words when we talk about propositions and facts. We say propositions are true, but we say facts obtain.
Huh, that is interesting. It's like we're using different verbs to describe what's basically the same idea. Does that create a problem for the identity theory?
It might seem hope it, but it doesn't have to be a deal breaker. The identity theory could say that this difference in language is just a quirk. It's like saying soda and pop.
Ah, I see. Different words, same thing.
Right. Different words, same bubbly beverage. So we might use different words for propositions and facts, but that doesn't mean they can't be the same type of thing deep down.
So maybe the congruence problem is more about semantics than substance.
That's one way to look at it, but there's one more challenge we should talk about. It's the individuation problem, which suggests that we make more distinctions between propositions than we do with facts.
Okay, break that down for me, the individuation problem. What's that all about?
Think about this. Hesperus is bright, and phosphorus is bright.
Okay.
For a long time, astronomers thought Hesperus and phosphorus were two different stars, one in the evening sky and one in the morning.
Oh, right, right.
But they eventually realized both names actually referred to the same planet, Venus.
So we have two different propositions that are actually talking about the same fact, Venus being bright.
That's right. And this is a tough one for the identity theory, because if propositions are supposed to be identical to facts, then how do we explain these cases where we have multiple propositions that all seem to be pointing to the same fact?
Does that mean the identity theory is sunk? Is there no way to make those fine-grained distinctions in language fit with The more general nature of facts?
Well, this is where that hybrid view we mentioned earlier might come in. If we accept that there could be different levels of facts, some more specific than others,
Okay, yeah.
we might be able to save the identity theory. We could say that both thoughts and propositions can be true by being identical to facts, but they might be identical to facts at different levels of detail.
So the hybrid view gives us a little wiggle room. Like it allows us to say that, yeah, Hesperus is bright and phosphorus is bright are different propositions because they express different ways of understanding the same thing. But they're still both true because they both match up with the fact that Venus is bright.
Exactly. The hybrid view tries to bridge the gap between Frege's focus on sense and Russell's focus on reference by saying that both levels of meaning are involved in determining truth.
Okay, I'm starting to see the bigger picture here. But if we manage to overcome all these challenges and the identity theory turns out to be right, what does that tell us about truth itself? Is there something more to it than just saying that propositions are identical to facts?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? If the identity theory can handle all these objections, it seems to be saying something pretty big about truth itself. It's like truth is this super fundamental property of reality, not something you can break down into smaller bits or define using other things.
So we can't define truth as like matching reality or fitting in with our beliefs. It just is. It's one of those basic foundational concepts.
Exactly. It's what philosophers call intrinsicism. Truth is built into proposition, and it's primitive, meaning it doesn't depend on anything else.
So maybe the identity theory isn't giving us a neat little definition of truth, but it's more like showing us what truth looks like. It's saying that being true basically means being a fact, being part of how things really are.
You got it. Instead of trying to define truth using other concepts, the identity theory says, hey, truth is already here, right in the fabric of reality.
That's a pretty wild idea when you think about it. But hold on. How does this all connect to us regular folks, people who aren't philosophers? What does it mean for us when we're trying to figure out what's true in our lives?
Well, think about what this means for our thoughts and beliefs. If the identity theory is right, and some of the things we think are actually shaping reality, because true thinkables become facts, that gives our minds a much bigger role in creating the world we live in.
Well, wait a minute. Are you saying that if my beliefs are true, they're actually making facts? Like, I have the power to change reality with my thoughts?
That's the question philosophers have been wrestling with forever. It gets into that deep connection between our minds and what's real. And the identity theory definitely leans toward the idea that our minds aren't just passive observers. They're actively involved, and maybe even helping to create the structure of the world.
That's incredible. It makes you wonder about how powerful our beliefs can be, especially when we all share those beliefs. Maybe we're all shaping reality together without even realizing it.
It's definitely something to think about, and that's what's so cool about the identity theory. It makes us ask big questions about truth, about belief, and about how our minds interact with the world. It gives us more questions than answers.
I think you've definitely given us a lot to chew on today. This deep dive into the identity theory of truth has been a wild ride. We've gone through its main ideas, tackled some of its biggest challenges, and even got a glimpse of how mind-blowing it could be if it's true. We've only scratched the surface, but I have a feeling these ideas are going to stick with us.
I agree. And if you're really hooked on this theory, I highly recommend checking out the full Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy entry on it. It's got even more insights and argument and different perspectives on the identity theory of truth.
Absolutely. Who knows? Maybe you'll even come up with your own take on what truth really is. Until next time, keep thinking, everyone.